Much of our national identity is built on the idea of success, of America as a nation of pioneers, inventors, and innovators. But the American story is a story of failure, of faltering first steps, of trials and tribulations. The following objects are reflections on how Americans have taken failure, embraced it, and moved forward. In the late 19th century, scientists theorized how to achieve heavier-than-air flight. Before the Wright brothers and their flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, many scientists and engineers experienced successes and failures of their own. Octave Chanute retired from his successful career as an engineer to pursue his lifelong interest in aeronautics. Chanute's multiple-wing glider was designed to test if it was possible to use pivoting wings to control the center of pressure across the body of the glider. Knowing what we know today about airplanes, it doesn't really look like it will fly. And it did not. Despite his failures, Chanute went on to become one of the Wright brothers' most ardent supporters. He supplied them with the latest aeronautical information and encouraged them to continue in spite of failures. The Smithsonian recommended his book, Progress in Flying Machines, to Wilbur Wright, who was conducting research for his own aircraft. 4 years later, he and his brother made their historic flight in Kitty Hawk. Although Chanute's endeavors did not yield positive results, his ideas led to the development of variable sweep wings, which were used on numerous military aircraft, including the B-1 Lancer. Chanute lived long enough to see his failures breed success. In science, one failure leads to another attempt, and lessons learned are an investment. But the path to success is not always so straight and narrow. It twists and turns, and sometimes small success can lead to greater failure. In 1867, after decades of failed relations with the Indian nations, Congress authorized the Peace Commission to negotiate settlements and treaties with tribes in the western United States. Here on the steps of the White House, with President Andrew Johnson, the delegations from Yankton, Santee, Upper Missouri Sioux, Sac and Fox, Ojibwe, Ottawa, Kickapoo, and Miami signed the Medicine Lodge Treaties, outlining changes in territory and terms of restitution. When Chief Hole in the Day of the Ojibwe signed the treaty, he believed it represented a strong step forward in relations between the United States and the native nations, offering new land, housing, and supplies. Ultimately, this treaty, like so many others before it, was broken by the United States. Although Hole in the Day saw the negotiations as a failure, nearly 50 years later, those broken treaties have become powerful legal tools in the fight for native rights. A new generation is using these bad papers to maintain the sovereignty of the native nations and to begin to correct the wrongs of the past. In many ways, success and failure are two sides of the same coin. What is seen as a triumph one day can turn to bitterness the next. Although the path is not always clear, perseverance in the face of these failures is what ultimately leads to success. In 1915, the Committee of Colored Citizens of the Grand Army of the Republic began collecting funds for a Negro memorial and a national museum. This pocket bank depicts the proposed design of a national Negro memorial, dedicated to the idea that the achievements of African Americans deserved to be acknowledged and celebrated. Although the idea gained the support of President Coolidge, the Great Depression, a lack of congressional support, and rising racial tensions caused the idea to fade. In 1988, Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, a civil rights activist who had protested during the 1960s, introduced legislation supporting the creation of a National African American Museum. For 13 years, Congressman Lewis pushed his legislation, suffered setbacks, and championed an idea that many times was nearly snuffed out. In 2003, Congress passed legislation authorizing the creation of a national museum, opening its doors as the National Museum of African American History and Culture in 2016. This institution, 100 years in the making, opened to great acclaim, and although the design no longer resembles the image on the souvenir, the dream it represents survived.
As long as there is the United States of America, Now there will be a National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Chanute's design helped guide the Wright brothers, whose plane started a technological revolution. The success of Hole in the Day's negotiations did not end mistreatment of the Native people, but provided the legal precedents to demand recognition. The National Museum of African American History and Culture stands testament to over a century of persistence. Too often our American story forgets those who came before it, who tried and failed, and whose failures paved the way for greatness.